A very good evening to all our viewers and welcome to Monday's edition of the Evening Review. My name is Taiwan Jabela, your host. Let's look at some of the headlines in tomorrow's Namibian Sun. So 1.4 billion offer for Namibia. Death certificate for the Okahanja crash victims not yet out. And Windhoek rains, a gift and a curse for some in the city. Those are headlines in tomorrow's Namibian Sun. Tonight in the studio, we are welcoming the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of the Namibia Tourism Board, that is Digu Naobeb, to talk to us, to give us a bit of reaction to a landmark ruling in the High Court last week regarding the Kora case, where a judge ruled in favor of NTB and Mr. Naobeb. Just to reflect on that for us, especially on the way forward. Digu, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show. As a matter of fact, you've been here before.
Yes. Yeah. Good evening.
Yeah, no, wonderful. A landmark case, not only in terms of the ruling itself, but because of the gravity of that Kora thing. It's considered one of the biggest in the country. You eventually pursued Mondial Telecom of Mr. Ernst Adjovi and won that case. How did you celebrate? Did you throw a party at work and stuff?
No, actually, we did not do celebrations.
Yeah.
In fact, it came as a surprise.
Yeah.
Because when the case was ongoing, me as the only witness in the case, and during the examinations and cross-examinations, one was not very sure which way the case would go.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Mr. Adjovi and his witnesses did not make it to the court proceedings, but definitely it has concluded the case that was in the running for the last 7 years. So it was coming on for 7 years. So basically what then remains is that we'd have to then explore ways and means through internationally available instruments, how best we could pursue to recover the funds which has now been granted in our favor.
And that is where my difficulty is, Digu, the fact that Mr. Adjovi is from Benin, and he switches residence between Benin and Ivory Coast last time I checked. Does that complicate your pursuit for repayment, given the jurisdiction issues?
Actually, before we really as part of the case, before we filed the case through our lawyers, we did already had conducted a bit of research. Our lawyers got connections or partners in Ivory Coast, which then pursued to just determine the existence of the company. So the information we have is that the company is registered indeed in Ivory Coast, and of course it's owned by Mr. Ernst Adjovi. However, we could not further continue with that, but now that the rulings have been done, of course, that is one way which we could try and get some information, but that certainly reduces, but we have to reduce costs on our side because legal costs are very high. So besides that route, one has to then explore the Interpol route. How can we then recover these funds both in Benin and also in Ivory Coast, because he resides in Benin, that's what we know, but his business operates out of Ivory Coast, so there could be mechanisms in Interpol. So now we are actually busy doing the calculations because the judgment also includes the legal cost. So the legal cost that we incurred over the last 7 years needs to be quantified so that it is added to the bill of the 23 million that we had paid. And through that, we'd have to engage Nampol, Namibian police, and see how best can we then jointly work to try and recover those monies.
Indeed. How much do we know, Digu, about Mr. Adjovi and his business empire, if he has one? I'm asking this question to try and establish his ability to repay back this money. You know, in other words, for example, are his assets worth that much? Is he a rich man that can pay back 3 million? Especially, because in the olden days you could say, look, when it was still a fresh transaction, maybe the money was still somewhere stored. But 7 years is a long time to still have it somewhere. What do we know about his asset base? Maybe just as a starting point to say there's still confidence that he can repay back the money.
No, that is the information that is very sketchy, that we don't even have anyway per se. So that's one of those things that needs to be established, and that's what I'm saying. Possibly those legal company that we had previously engaged, who is a company from Ivory Coast, could possibly be approached to also assist us in that regard to establish that. So one has to do all that kind of groundwork to establish whether he has some means to recover. But of course, he is, as far as we know, internationally well-known person who engages in this type of activities of organizing Kora and all that. And it will be in his own interest as business person to really try and refund the funds so that he can keep a clean record in case he wants to pursue such kind of activities further in his profession. But because that will probably have a reputational damage. So it will be, in my view, to his best interest to try and see how best can he settle that, and then obviously save his face. Otherwise, it may doom his career going forward.
Indeed. Just as an executive, as a leader of business, Mr. Naobeb, what kind of confidence did you have at the time of making these transactions as an organization? What kind of groundwork did you satisfy yourself with, or were you receiving instructions from somewhere else to effect that payment?
Well, Mr. Adjovi, and at the time his country director by then, Ronaldo Shimi, did approach us with that offer, which was then negotiated because we didn't have funds. Of course, our line ministry then intervened and said they will make the funds available. But of course, one cannot, in this conduct, be able to assess the person's conduct or how a person would be. But what we know and what I've seen also myself was that, of course, Kora was held. I think I followed the one that was held in South Africa. So for us, at that point in time, it was a project that was done, and there were examples of it, that it was actually launched, and therefore, and the time frame of that we were negotiating was also short for us to have done a further due diligence. But of course, for the information that is available in the media arena, we knew, of course, these projects were held and they were successful. So that was the premise on which we were doing these negotiations. But of course, as part of the negotiations, like it was mentioned in the court proceedings, where that we wanted them to establish an office here, have a bank account here, so that in fact that was the way for us to minimize our risk. But of course, all those things finally did not make it to the contract when the Office of the Attorney General then intervened. So there were a couple of gap stops that we wanted to implement to just ensure that the risk is minimized as from the business perspective, because as a business person you need to, in terms of any contracts that you enter into, to try and minimize the risk in the favor of your organization, even though there's two parties.
Yeah, indeed. You spoke about, you briefly alluded to the Kora country director here, Mr. Tonata Shimi. I know that he was a respondent at one stage in this matter. I don't know how, because there was a time when it was said that he was removed from the list of respondents and whatnot. Does this judgment affect him? Does it empower you to pursue him in some capacity?
No. The judgment is not impacting Mr. Tonata Shimi per se, because him was excluded because evidence at the time did not point that he had some sort of direct ownership in this project, apart from him being an employee as a country director. Yes. So therefore, it was very difficult for us to pursue him, given the evidence that was before us at that point in time. And that is basically the advice of our legal team at the time, to say we don't have sufficient grounds and evidence to pursue him.
Just again, I mean, as a veteran business leader, and you've done a sterling job leading the Namibia Tourism Board as a sort of the gateway for our country's tourism. Is Kora the one thing that puts a dark spot on your reputation as a business leader? Do you sometimes think to yourself, because we are hearing so many versions. For example, we're hearing, for example, that I mean, even in the court papers, there are affidavits there submitted by Adjovi's team with screenshots of his communication with the president discussing the Kora thing. Then the minister of, your line minister, Pamba Shifeta, also having been very active in engaging the NTB to warm up to this idea. Do you sometimes think that you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that this was never your idea, but that you just had to carry out instructions from your principals?
Actually, I would say the idea was tabled to us by Mr. Adjovi and his team. And we looked at it from the business perspective, being a tourism destination. And the idea to us sounded very well. Of course, we said, no, we don't have the funds, because we didn't have funds. That is how the additional funds for the specific project got made available. And we considered this, from Namibia Tourism Board perspective, as a contract that we would have to negotiate and enter into as the NTB entity against Mondial Telecom. And that is exactly what we have done. And that's why we make sure, in terms of the clause that, in terms of the contract, the clause that any other discussions or any other agreements or any other commitments or promises that probably could have been made would not be part of this contract, because this contract specifically speaks only about promoting Namibia as a tourism destination. And as you could see in the court papers, this was in fact the defense of Mr. Adjovi's them, to say that there was a main agreement. Ours was subservient to that one, but of course the court has found, and the judge has ruled and said no, our contract was never subject to any other agreements or discussions that were held. So for us, it didn't matter whether that he had any agreements with government level or with the minister, the director, ministry level. We didn't matter, because we looked at the project holistically and saw the benefit that could, or the opportunity that could accrue from that. So for us as a NTB leader, for me it was about how did we as NTB when we went into that, the thing failed. How do we then remedy the situation? And that is how we then pursued the court case to try and recover the funds. And in fact, it is proven in terms of the court, our contract was sound. At least quite a number of things that we pushed through ended up into the contract, and that is how, in fact, it never found any recklessness in terms of the decision either by the board or the CEO that we have made. We have done from the corporate governance perspective, we have done everything that we could to our ability to do. So as an organization, even though people had felt at the time, or there are perceptions out there that the NTB CEO, Digu Naobeb, could have been reckless in terms of how he spent the money, or the board, there were things, because in terms of the contract, because like I said, you never can, even if you do a due diligence, assess the person's character. Only it came out in the end that Mr. Adjovi was not able or to execute the project because of various reasons that he had said that government could not grant him money, but as a business person, it was his duty to ensure that he was to raise funds to make sure that the project is off the ground. And that is exactly what he didn't do. And that is the rationale we were going after him, and said in our arguments that he did not deliver on the promise that he made in terms of the contract that was entered into by the two parties.
Indeed. You spoke about the contract, that contract, quite extensively, Digu. One of the issues also that popped up during the duration of this issue was the manner in which the Attorney General at the time, Mr. Saki Shanghala, allegedly exposed NTB to risk in terms of the provisions that were included in that contract, that, for example, there was no sufficient protection or remedy for you to pursue this matter. Of course, in the end, you succeeded at least to get a ruling. But there was also that issue. Did it make you at any stage feel that you were going into that case with that also at the back of your mind, to say, yes, we were correct in our dealings, but at a higher level, especially that the way that agreement was crafted had exposed us a little bit? What did you feel about that?
Actually, the only elements that definitely did not make it to the end was our demand that the company must have a bank account in Namibia and domicile address, because at least it could have, so that we could have paid monies locally here in Namibia, so that we could then cushion the risk. That is the one that did not make it, and definitely this was the high risk, which we in fact also notified then Attorney General to say we opined that definitely would put us at a very disadvantaged position, and that was already known at the time. Yeah.
If because NTB will continue to be a very, very crucial institution, public institution of our country, and your mandate to promote tourism will continue to grow. As a matter of fact, the need for you to continue promoting tourism will continue to be very compelling. I'm just wondering, going forward, if something similar, it doesn't have to come from Mr. Adjovi himself, but if another proposition comes on the table, and I know that I'm putting you in a very difficult position when I ask this question, but the fact of the matter, Mr. Naobeb, is that there has been, maybe prior to NTB being approached for the Kora Awards proposition, there were conversations that were had at a much, much higher level. And as an SOE and as a CEO with principals who are in government, and some of whom had this kind of conversations with Mr. Adjovi, you hardly had a choice. And I know you're trying here to say that look, we made our conscious decision. But I have a feeling also that you had also an obligation to listen to your principals in some ways, to say, look, we are sending these guys to you, see how you're going to deal with them. This can happen again in the future. How are you going to deal with a similar situation where a proposition is brought to your office, but there seems to have been prior conversations with your principals? How will it influence your decisions going forward?
No, actually, because we have a procurement act that is in place. So everything that we have to do, because at that point in time, there wasn't any procurement act. And the procurement act now is governing both government and the parastatals in as far as how we do and conduct our business. And all that has to be pursued in that light, because that procurement act doesn't make provision for solicited type of projects that you have to fund. It has to go through a procuring process, and basically that is an instrument that guides us going forward. No matter how the project emanates, it has to stand firm the test of time, whether that has been done in line of Procurement Act. And if it cannot be, then of course it can't be entertained.
How independent is your job, Mr. Naobeb, in terms of political influence? You are leading a public institution, but you are entrusted with that position. When people say, Digu, you are going to be the CEO going forward, in principle it means that we are going to allow you to run this institution as you deem it fit, as long as you prescribe yourself to within the governance instruments. But often, a lot of CEOs get into that position, and then they get a lot of instructions. Some of them do not make business sense. Some of them are politically motivated. How independent is your position?
No, basically, at least us in our environment currently with the present minister, the reporting lines are very clear. Because I mean, the minister is also on record publicly that he directly does not engage with CEOs, and CEOs shouldn't directly engage with him. So he has appointed the board, and he engages through the board. So, and as a company, we do have a strategic business plan, which the board then approves, which the minister approves. So whatever we do as an organization must be guided, that it is, whether it is within our corporate strategic plan, and is it desired for us to pursue such kind of an activity to achieve our goals. So in all those, and the plans are also there, what kind of activities we are going to be pursuing. So if it is out of line, definitely, in fact, even at the board level, I don't think they would entertain it. Of course, there were some of the kind of those ideas that were brought even to the board, and it was not entertained.
Indeed. The last question then, Digu, is last week you spoke quite strongly against the manner in which Namibia is being restricted regarding the Dubai Expo, which is underway in Dubai. Namibia is being restricted to participate in that event because of the COVID situation in the country. We have a Namibian stand, or whatever you want to call it, a pavilion at that expo. And somehow, what can you tell us about the status of our presence there, the status of our participation in that thing, and what kind of conversations are happening in terms of now allowing us to be there on the ground?
Basically, all this emanated about towards the end of November last year, when the scientists of South Africa discovered Omicron. So the world at that point in large thought it was a more dangerous kind of a virus than the Delta that had afflicted us at the time. So the doors to SADC member states were shut altogether. However, even our president and the president of South Africa and all others at various platforms speak out about that strongly, that because the scientists have discovered that virus doesn't simply mean that we are not in a better position to be able to manage COVID. So as a result of it, UK and Germany and and EU and all those lifted those travel restrictions because they really wanted their citizens not to travel to Southern Africa, including Namibia. And that's why we had a lot of cancellations towards the end of November, December, because we had a lot of bookings. We are seeing tourism industry coming up, and United Arab Emirates followed suit. However, they have not even at this point in time that we are talking about considered lifting those travel restrictions for Southern Africa. Yet we are participating, and there are activities that we have to undertake, and that requires Namibians to travel to Dubai to be able to conduct this type of activities and engage with the business fraternity to try and promote investment, equally ask to promote tourism so that we could then get tourists coming because it's a international platform. In fact, last we were informed that they could provide special permits for officials to travel, but even that was subsequently suspended. So what I'm now understanding is that the Namibia Investment and Promotion and Development Board, which is the organizer of the pavilion, has now been engaging in meetings today because they have been engaging probably through Merco, they were understood, with the government in Dubai to see how can they alleviate that so that we are allowed in to try and participate to conduct our business, because of course there are investments made and we have to realize returns out of that. So I cannot understand why these travel restrictions are still intact whilst Omicron, that was discovered in South Africa, had a ravaging impact in Europe and in UK, yet the citizens of those countries are allowed to travel to Dubai without any travel restrictions. But our cases are not increasing that at a high rate like we had with the Delta. So I guess that is a thing that at the political level or diplomatic level needs to be resolved.
Indeed. Digu, thank you very much for making time.
Thanks.
We appreciate your time always and your input. I think a lot of our viewers appreciate also. They get to understand things better when you do that. At least unlike your other CEOs, you come in the hot seat and face my audience and speak to them. Okay. So we appreciate that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that was Digu Naobeb, CEO of the Namibia Tourism Board, speaking to us about the Kora judgment last week, as well as Namibia being banned or restricted from participating in the Dubai Expo, despite a 20 million investment that we have allocated to that particular activity. Thank you for watching and good night.